let's get started once again. Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is pack mentality, how wolves hunt, and it will be presented by wildlife biologist Aaron Bott. Aaron, thank you so much for being here today and bringing us more of your passion and knowledge on the subject. Let's go ahead and dive in.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. I've given many webinars now on wolves and wolf ecology, but I haven't had the opportunity to talk about wolf predation and how wolves hunt, which is really, in a nutshell, what makes them so charismatic and so controversial to so many people. So I'm excited to be talking about this today and hopefully enliven our understanding of wolves and how they are what they are. So without further ado, we'll get right into it. I'm a wolf biologist. I've been working on wolves for a number of years now in the Western American states. I did my graduate research in Yellowstone National Park, and I'm currently employed by a government agency studying wolves, where we go out and we monitor the overall health of the population and their abundance on the landscape. And we're also studying how and why they do the things that they do in order for us to better understand their ecology, as well as to better understand and appreciate their biology, but also to hopefully help us have better opinions of the animal. Overall, wolves are controversial, and by learning exactly what the wolf is and what it is capable of doing and what it's not capable of doing can help us with our management decisions. So I am excited to be sharing some of this knowledge with you today, and I assume that you're all interested in the wolf, and we can kind of nerd out together as we get into the nitty-gritty of wolf biology and behavioral hunting patterns. In this photograph, someone asked me recently what's going on in this photograph, so I should probably explain. This is a yearling female that was caught, and we're putting a radio collar around her neck. I'm tightening the nuts and bolts on that collar. She's anesthetized right now, and about 20 minutes later, her drugs wore off. Her body metabolized the drugs that anesthetized her and tranquilized her, and she got up and wandered off, and now she's living happily with her pack of 7 individuals. She's got a mom and a dad and some siblings, and some very young siblings born earlier this spring. So the wolf as a killing machine is unfortunately how the world often perceives of the wolf. Everyone wants to know why wolves hunt and how frequently they hunt and what their impacts as predators on prey species are. I often joke with people that if wolves ate grass and daisies, then they wouldn't be controversial and we wouldn't care about them as much, for good or for bad. Wolves have a long, really complex history with humans. We have evolved with them for the last several tens of thousands of years. We have overlapped with them in the northern hemisphere, where they have an incredible historical distribution across Eurasia, as well as North America, and even into northern Africa historically. These remarkable canines, the progenitor to the domestic dog that is now ubiquitous across the globe, really is a charismatic species and has penetrated so many different societies that today it carries an extreme amount of cultural baggage. There are people all over the world that have an idea of what the wolf is. They apply symbology and emotions on top of this biological entity, this living organism, And the wolf itself is just another animal that is completely oblivious to the values that we place upon it. And it's trying to navigate a very complex anthropocentric world where it's trying to make a living and trying to survive. But we as people, we're interested in the wolf. And again, we're interested in it because it's a predator. And for tens of thousands of years, we have competed with this wolf. And we've been trying to exist with it in some places. And in some places, it's been complicated. And we've struggled with the adoption of agrarian practices and livestock husbandry, where wolves can potentially threaten that sense of security and our economy. And in other places where we have been hunters and gatherers, we have perceived the wolf as competition for game and for resources and food that we require as well. So I often point out to people that yes, we have wolves in the western portion of the United States today, as well as around the Great Lakes states. And yes, the wolf is controversial today, just like it has been for the last century and a half. But this is not an American Western story. The first bounty ever recorded to having been placed upon the wolf was documented in the 6th century BC in ancient Greece. And humans everywhere, indigenous peoples in North America, as well as indigenous peoples in Europe and Asia, have often butted heads with this really remarkable species. And again, it all boils down to the fact that it doesn't eat grass, it competes with us. So to help us better understand and appreciate what the wolf can do, we work as scientists, as biologists, to try and monitor wolf populations and abundance, as well as monitor game populations or prey populations. And we're trying to document exactly how wolves hunt and what are they capable of and what are their behavioral patterns that ultimately influence their kill rates, their success rates for bringing down large prey. And we do this by careful examination, lots of field studies, of course, capturing and radio collaring wolves in order to track their movements and to track their, again, kill rates, how successful they are out in the field. And unless we have this data, human tolerance for wolves will remain elusive. So by improving our understanding of this organism, hopefully we can begin to appreciate its role in the ecosystem. I like to begin all of my presentations by defining the subjects that we're going to be talking about. And of course, our hero in today's presentation is the wolf. So I'll quickly move through this. Again, I've given multiple presentations for Natural Habitat Adventures on the wolf and what wolves are, but in my field of study, I've found that it's a fatal mistake to assume that your audience knows what a wolf is and how it lives. There's a lot of misunderstanding surrounding the wolf. Again, sometimes for various reasons, anti-wolf sentiment is prevalent, but also pro-wolf sentiment can mislead us into misinterpreting what the animal actually is. So I'll begin by saying that the wolf is commonly referred to as the gray wolf, but just like black bears, not all black bears are black and not all gray wolves are gray. Their scientific name is Canis lupus, and as I've already mentioned, they have a tremendous historical distribution across the northern hemisphere. Essentially, a wolf in Europe is the same species of wolf as we have in Asia, which is essentially the same species of wolf as we have in North America, all Canis lupus. There are a handful of subspecies as we've been getting better at genome sequencing and studying DNA from animals and their phylogenetic histories, their evolutionary characteristics in relation to other species. We have whittled down the number of subspecies that are recognized in North America to about 5. We've got the western subspecies, the plain subspecies, the Mexican gray wolf subspecies, the Arctic gray wolf subspecies. Let's see, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the eastern subspecies of wolf. But essentially, they're all, at one point in time, there would have been a continuous population, a continual gradium of wolves extending from southern Mexico all the way up to the Arctic. And all of these wolves would have engaged with one another at some degree of spatial overlap, and they would have been able to breed with one another. So again, one species of wolf. I will put in here as a footnote that we do have a separate species of wolf that actually is not very closely related, as we can understand it, to the gray wolf, and we call that Canis rufus, the red wolf, which historically evolved here in North America, most likely, and it is highly endangered. That is a distinct species, but everywhere else you've got Canis lupus, the gray wolf. So wolves on average live very dangerous and high octane lives. So their lifespan is pretty brief, between 2 to 5 years is the average lifespan of a wolf, but they can potentially live up to 12 years or more, just like a big dog. And their average size is about 100 pounds. Males are larger than females. 100 pounds, though, is typically what we're looking at. Everyone, I think, has at least the basic understanding that wolves live in groups called packs. What many people don't appreciate is that a pack is essentially a family group. Wolves are a cooperative breeding species where you have a breeding pair, a mother and a father, that produce offspring year after year, and these offspring eventually reach an age of sexual maturity, about 2 years of age, at which point in time they disperse and they go off on their own to find mates of their own and to start families of their own. Very similar to humans, and we take for granted that this is aberrant in the animal kingdom. We and wolves are some of the very few species that actually practice this cooperative breeding and live in groups where biparental care, meaning the male and the female both equally help to raise the offspring. It's pretty abnormal. Again, we don't see this in a lot of other species in the animal kingdom. Wolves, as I mentioned, reproduce once a year. On average, their litters are about 6 pups, but as with all wild species out on the natural landscape, mortality is high for young pups, for newborns. And so usually it's between 4 and 5 pups that survive the first calendar year. Now, it should be obvious to everyone that wolves are carnivores, but in case somewhere in the weeds we missed that, I just want to reiterate that wolves must kill and eat other animals in order to survive. They're members of the order Carnivora. They have evolved to eat flesh. They have the dentition and the digestive system that help facilitate this. And all this is a way to gain energy so that the organism itself can thrive and can reproduce. So again, this is why wolves are controversial. It's because they eat meat, and we also eat meat. Wolves don't recognize today the difference between native prey, such as bison, and foreign prey, such as domestic livestock like cattle. A wolf's lifespan compared to ours is relatively short, and a wolf that grows up in central Idaho today has known its whole life that cattle and sheep, domestic sheep, are a potential food source on the landscape, just like that wolf's parents and its grandparents and its great-grandparents had on the landscape. So even though we understand that domestic livestock are a no-no for wolves to eat, something that is taboo, the wolf itself sees no reason why it shouldn't consume any available resource, whatever is most acceptable to regarding its kill rate and also regarding its management of risk. So when a wolf kills something like a bison or an elk, we as humans call this predation, which I think is self-explanatory, but we classify when wolves kill domestic livestock as depredation, which means property has been damaged. But again, of course, the wolf is oblivious to this. So as scientists, we try and understand what is it that makes wild prey, wild ungulates, wild hoofed animals vulnerable to wolves for predation, and how can we help encourage domestic livestock to be less vulnerable. And I know what you might be thinking, that seems like a foolhardy task, but the truth is that our cattle and our domestic sheep have been bred and domesticated for so long that they really have pretty poor predator defense responses. So we are challenged with the task of trying to figure out how can we help influence ranchers and livestock producers into beefing up, if you will, their cattle and their domestic sheep so that they don't appear so vulnerable to wolves, so that wolves become more intimidated by them. And this might mean ranchers have to switch to raising different kinds of livestock, perhaps. My brother dabbles in bison ranching, and I often joke with him that those who ranch bison generally don't have to worry about wolf depredation on the landscape, because bison are big and dangerous and intimidating to wolves. So perhaps it means cattlemen might need to consider switching to different breeds of livestock that are more hardy, but also it might mean we actually dress up our livestock. And we, in some ways, with fencing, with human presence, with livestock guardian dogs, we make those vulnerable prey seem, again, less vulnerable to deter wolves from pursuing livestock as a food source. Food is very crucial. In fact, it is arguably the most important aspect of animal behavior. Everything, all life has to eat in order to survive. If you can't eat, then reproduction and survival are not options. And so a wolf, as it goes out on the landscape, is trying to consume food in order to meet its other life objectives. And again, we today in a modern 21st century world, we take for granted because food is so readily available to us. And we're fascinated with diets to try and reduce our caloric intake in order to live healthier. We take for granted that the rest of the world, all of the other organisms, are obsessed with consumption of resources. They are trying so desperately hard to eat enough in order to meet the other basic needs of their life history. So wolves have got to eat in order to survive. Predation, of course, is one kind of foraging, one type of consumption of calories and nutrients. And in this particular case, predation can take a wide variety of different courses. It is defined as the consumption of an organism by another organism where the prey is alive when the predator first attacks. And so I've included here a picture of deer foraging upon grass. This is a type of predation. A snake eating a lizard, of course, is predation. A shark eating a seal is predation. But we're interested in this kind of behavior because we have one organism consuming another organism that is essentially alive when the predator first begins to consume it. Scavenging is a different kind of consumption of calories, right? So occasionally wolves do scavenge. In fact, because hunting is so risky, they very often will resort to scavenging whenever possible. But you sometimes have to actually wrestle with your prey in order to get a meal, and that is what wolves have to get at. Studying the dynamics of predation and how hunting plays out is too often oversimplified as a cat and mouse kind of a game. We look at predation and animal behavior, and we want things to be binary and simplistic. We want to say, how many mice can a cat eat? And how effective are cats at killing mice? What we fail to observe in these kind of scenarios is that there are a lot of variables at play. One variable being how many cats are there versus how many mice are there. If there's very few mice and a lot of cats, then the success rate or the kill rate of cats killing mice is going to be pretty low, pretty limited. If there are a lot of mice and only one cat, then the kill rate presumably is going to be very high. But again, we have to take into consideration the variables of our population. Are these super mice that are so wicked fast that cats are literally unable to capture them? Or are they normal mice, but our cats are, for some reason, disinterested in killing the mice and consuming them? Or are the cats handicapped in some other way? These are all variables that we have to take in consideration when addressing something as basic as predator kill rates of prey. So when, again, wildlife managers and the public reach out and ask, what are the effects of wolves on an elk population? Or what are the effects of wolves on a deer population? It's not that easy to answer these questions, because every habitat, every ecosystem, every ecotype has so many different variables at play, an innumerable amount of variables at play. So the best we can do is try and understand the system to the best of our ability by, again, collecting more data. I have talked again about wolves and how they've evolved on the landscape, but I'll quickly just refresh everyone's memory that wolves are members of the order Carnivora, so they consume meat. And because they consume meat in an order with a lot of different other animals that also consume meat, they have to compete with those kinds of animals. And they have evolved to have specific characteristics, physiological and morphological traits that allow them to fit in this world of competition. This ongoing process of evolution, where wolves have evolved to bring down prey much larger than themselves, has been an ongoing and is an ongoing evolutionary arms race. It's noticeable to everyone that wolves, being on average 100 pounds, are bringing down prey generally many times their own body size. So this bull elk here that this pack of wolves in Yellowstone is pursuing, this bull elk is probably pushing 700-800 pounds. And on average, each one of those wolves is about 100 pounds. So even if you combined their weight, they're still less than half of or about half of the body weight or the mass that this bull elk is. It's remarkable that these individuals would tackle something so large and so apparently dangerous. So how is it that they're able to succeed as hunters, and how often are they successful at bringing down large prey like this? Those are, again, kind of the questions that we're looking at trying to answer. And there are telltale signs about this evolutionary arms race where, again, very poetically, you could say that the wolf on its swiftest day doesn't typically outrun the elk. The elk runs just fast enough to escape the wolf, but occasionally slips up just enough to become dinner for the wolf. So they are neck to neck in terms of this evolutionary arms race of who is potentially going to become the winner of this challenge. And this is something I want to point out is often overlooked by wolf advocates and people who are opposed to wolves as well. The fact that this elk has a tremendous amount going for it, a tremendous ability to navigate this complex landscape where wolves and grizzly bears and mountain lions are all out to get it. Elk are really phenomenal, as are all prey, including things as basic as deer. They're incredibly well adapted and well evolved to handling predation situations. If elk were not so robust, they would have gone extinct a long time ago. And very often we get caught up in kind of this, wow, this amazing admiration for the wolf's ability to bring down something large. But conversely, we need to consider, wow, that elk is truly a formidable prey source. It's an incredible animal that very often survives wolf encounters. And because of that, the elk population is able to continue to persist and thrive on the landscape. And it's not just this consideration that we need to take with elk, but also with all prey species of any variety of predator-prey interactions on the landscape. So it's very persistent, again, arms race as one species pursues the other. Wolves are what we call cursorial predators, which means they chase their food down. And this makes them a lot less effective than the more successful cat-like animals. If you're a cat person, you know that cats tend to ambush their prey. They're secretive. They have very sharp teeth and very sharp claws, which are retractable. Their wrists can supinate, just like our wrists, and so their claws are used as weapons. They typically lunge at their prey unexpectedly. They will latch onto the back, they'll bite the neck or the jugular, and their sharp claws dig into the backs of their prey, and ultimately they wrestle them and bring them down to the ground. And because of their methods of ambushing their prey, the kill rates of felids are typically much higher than that of canids. In some studies, we've documented mountain lions, which coexist with wolves. Mountain lion success rates on killing elk are as high as 50 to 60%. Wolves don't have all of those morphological and physiological adaptations that the cat has. They diverged many millions of years ago from that family tree, and because they've diverged and because they have different physical characteristics, they're less successful in some ways than cats, such as mountain lions are. Wolves, when it comes to hunting elk, their kill success rates are generally about 20% versus a mountain lion's 50 to 60%. And when you're only considering adult elk, not calves, the kill success rate of wolves decreases to about 10%. So wolves are not great hunters, frankly. They're admirable, but this is one of the big myths that I'm constantly trying to help people to realize, is that they're admirable not because they're capable of killing such large prey, but because they still tenaciously stick around even though their fail rates are so high. The fact that they usually aren't capable of bringing down prey and yet are still persisting on the landscape, I think is truly remarkable. Physiologically, wolves have these elongated snouts, which allow them to smell their food and also to breathe and self-regulate their core temperature as they move great distances across the landscape. And compared to a cat's shorter snout, this has obvious advantages that I just mentioned, but it has some disadvantages as well. A longer snout means you have a lesser bite force. If you think about hinges, and the greatest amount of pressure is going to be closest to the hinge in accordance to the distal point of your hinge. And so the longer your snout is, generally, the weaker your bite is going to be. Wolves also, as I mentioned, lack the supination and retractable claws of cats, but they have these incredibly long legs and big feet that allow them to go great distances, and they're able to cross a lot of terrain in pursuit of their game. And ultimately, this is their superpower, their ability to endure on the landscape and to outrun, eventually, not outchase, but ultimately outrun as the prey gets more and more tired, their dinner is really what's remarkable about the wolf. And then, of course, their stomachs are remarkable as well. Canids can go a very long time being hungry, and I think this is also something that people forget to take into consideration. Wolves can go weeks without food, and when they get the opportunity to get food, they gorge themselves, and they can consume as much as 20 pounds of meat in one sitting. But it's that feast or famine cycle which really drives a wolf's mentality when it comes to hunting. How long can you go without food before you need to take some big risks in order to obtain food resources? This is sort of a grisly picture, and I apologize for not giving you a warning in advance, but this is a deer killed by wolves, and you can see that it's a pretty messy business. Because wolves hunt in groups, they lack the ability typically of surprising their prey. They definitely don't ambush their prey, and when they finally catch their prey, it's not pleasant to watch. And I have to say that I've watched wolves killing elk and killing bison and killing deer, and it's not fun. It's not fun to watch. And I've also done a lot of livestock depredation investigations where wolves have killed livestock, and it's messy to the point that it makes people uncomfortable. And I think this is an unfortunate disadvantage the wolf has. Very few people see mountain lions killing their prey. It's done so secretively and so quickly and efficiently that it's almost like we qualify it as being humane. But when wolves have to catch their prey, because they don't have those physical characteristics, those adaptations that make them successful very frequently, it's pretty clumsy and it's messy. And this kind of predation makes people's stomachs turn, and kind of is off-putting. And for those who don't like wolves to begin with, this kind of messy, awkward, predatory ability that, or lack of ability that they have, is off-putting. But I think to appreciate the species, it's important for us to, again, look at exactly what the wolf is and what it's trying to accomplish. And when we do this, it's, again, remarkable that the species has persisted for so long on the landscape. Wolves often are going after game much larger than themselves. In the Yellowstone ecosystem, elk are the dominant prey source for wolves. About 90 to 95% of the wolf's diet in the Yellowstone ecosystem is elk, despite there being a lot of other prey sources that they could pursue, one of which is bison. There is an abundance of bison on the landscape in Yellowstone. In fact, a growing population of bison, which has to be culled every year. People wish that wolves would consume more bison in order to naturally control that bison population. But bison males typically tip the scales at about 2,000 pounds. And when you compare that to a bull elk, which is 800 pounds, I think it's easy for us to understand why wolves prefer to go after elk instead of bison. Even cow bison are generally 1,000 pounds, and calves are well protected by the anti-predatory defense mechanisms that bison have. Elk tend to split and to flee from their predators. They panic, if you will. They live in great big herds, and as predators come at them, if wolves or other predators can get them to break ranks, they turn tail and run. Bison, on the other hand, generally will withstand a charge of wolves coming down upon them, and they defend their young more aggressively, which is advantageous again for the bison, and it can deter wolves. But wolves have a tremendous distribution across the northern hemisphere, as I've mentioned, and there are areas where there are wolves, but there are no elk. In Wood Buffalo National Park, the wolves up there are pursuing and consuming almost exclusively bison because there are no other resources for them to go towards. On Isle Royale National Park, you have a dual predator-prey population of wolves and moose. nothing else to eat except for moose. And moose are, as we all know, huge and very scary. And yet wolves have to adapt and tenaciously persist in pursuing those kinds of prey because that is all that is available to them. There's a great photo at the bottom here by Ronan Donovan of wolves on Ellesmere Island going after musk oxen. Again, a very dualistic kind of dance between one predator and the really only prey source that is on Ellesmere Island aside from Arctic hares. If you had more items on the menu, no doubt the wolves would choose more carefully at which prey source is going to be less likely to injure them. Injury and hunting risks are a really big part of the hunting equation that wolves have to take into consideration. I've attached also this photo of wolf 911 from Yellowstone National Park, which died after being killed by other wolves, but its skull was collected, and after cleaning the skull up, biologists were surprised to find this huge break in the wolf's jaw. That broken jaw did not occur in the attack by other wolves, meaning that this wolf had been living on the landscape for a long time. You can see that some of the bone is recalcifying around the breaks. It's healing, essentially. It had been living tenaciously as the dominant male in a pack, killing elk with its teeth, all while suffering an excruciating amount of pain due to a broken jaw, probably from an injury while hunting earlier in its life. It had been kicked, most likely, by an elk in the jaw, breaking its jaw completely, and yet the animal continued to live on and continued to tenaciously persist in trying to eke out a living. So because wolves have a disadvantage at bringing down their prey, they're often trying to navigate what kind of risks they're most willing to take and which ones they're most likely to avoid in order to save their own skins. Yellowstone, again, being a perfect example of this, where wolves more frequently pursue elk than they do moose and bison, just because moose and bison are larger and therefore more dangerous. This is a graph that I've got here from Yellowstone National Park showing the consumption rate of prey by wolves, elk exceeding over 80% in some studies, and we've got over 90% of the diet of wolves being elk. But this also breaks up kind of the age category, or the age-based selection of wolves in pursuit of their prey. Calves and older elk are going to be more vulnerable to wolves, and so that vulnerability is something that the wolves tend to exploit. Calves are vulnerable, but they're only vulnerable for a very short window during the spring and summer when they're born, before they quickly are able to keep up with the rest of the herd. Whereas older elk, especially in a mature herd that has been unexploited by predators for a long time, are going to have a lot of older elk, which are more susceptible to predation. At a study in Yellowstone between, oh boy, let's see if I can get the dates right, 2001 and 2004, I think, the average age of adult elk killed by wolves was over 13 years, which is remarkable. The prime age of a female elk is generally about 6 or 7 years old. So double the lifespan. These are old grandma elk that the wolves are bringing down, again, because they're bound to be more vulnerable and it's less risky to hunt them and to pursue them. Now, wolves live in groups, and for a long time it was assumed that the reason, one of the primary reasons that wolves live in groups, is in order for them to kind of set their disadvantages aside and cooperate in order to bring down prey that are a lot larger than themselves, to be more effective at hunting, essentially. If you got one wolf, you know, and you're 100 pounds, why not team up with a bunch of other wolves in order to bring down prey that are larger than you and more dangerous? This was the assumption for a very long time, but again, thanks to research in Yellowstone, specifically a paper published by McNulty et al. In 2012, we've begun to appreciate that wolves live in groups not in order to increase their success rates of hunting, but actually just to help their overall reproductive success in the rearing of offspring. So group living, pack living, is essentially an adaptation in order to ensure the highest rates of survival for your offspring that you're producing year after year. As far as kill rates go, we have documented single wolves, lone wolves, bringing down prey as large as moose all by themselves. And if you have fewer mouths at the dinner table, that means more meat for you, and a bigger portion of that kill goes straight into your belly rather than in someone else's belly. We have what is often called youngest feed first systems in African wild dogs as well as wolves, where you might be a yearling or a 2-year-old wolf, and you might be putting forth a lot of effort into hunting, but when it comes to consuming what you killed, you do not get the lion's share of the meal. Very often, the first that get fed are typically food resources for the pups of that year. So again, you're working very hard as a unit to support your little brothers and your little sisters, and no doubt there are some wolves, some older sibling wolves, that resent that, and one of the reasons why they probably split is because they complain about having to do so much work for their younger brothers and sisters without being able to gain as much for themselves. And so at some point in time in a wolf's life history, it becomes more advantageous for an individual to leave its natal pack, its family pack, its birth pack, and go off on its own in order to seek for better prospects. But something that was really interesting in this study that was published in 2012 by my professor, Dan McNulty, is that group size does not increase hunting success. It was, again, assumed that the larger your wolf pack was, the more success it would have in bringing down prey. If you wanted to hunt an elk more efficiently, simply get more wolves together and they will be able to bring down elk more frequently. Again, adding into kind of this popular myth that big packs mean big consumption of prey on the landscape. But we found out that there was no linear relationship. There was a non-linear relationship in this study, meaning that there was a threshold in hunting efficacy, and optimal hunting for elk was usually on groups between 2 and 7 wolves. With elk, specifically adult elk, it was averaged at about 4 wolves being your optimal hunting group size in order to bring down an elk. If you have more wolves in your group, your success rate does not increase, but rather you have more free riders, individuals in a large group, which basically kind of look for a free meal. So if you have a group of 10 wolves pursuing 1 elk, 4 individuals are really the ones that are putting forth the most effort in order to bring that elk down. The other 6 wolves in your pack are kind of just free riding. They're there to participate, but not at any risky level. They're not really working very hard. They're not putting forth a lot of effort. They're just looking to get a free meal out of it, more or less. So as groups or as packs increase in numbers, hunting success or kill success does not actually increase. Again, 4 being your optimal number for bringing down elk. Also, we were able to identify in this study that dangerous tasks were often a factor which indicated a decline in individual performance. So when you're hunting, it's a very long process of first moving in and trying to select which prey are most likely to be a good food source. You're looking for your vulnerable elk, and as you move in as a pack, you eventually work up a chase. So you start to pursue and again kind of weigh which prey species, which individual in your elk herd or your bison herd are going to be most vulnerable before you ultimately will attack, typically biting at the back of the animal, the hindquarters or the flanks of the animal, before one individual in particular has to make the killing bite and bring the prey down. And individual performance during these analyses of pack efficacy declined during those risky tasks, such as killing. So you might work really hard as a pack to get a prey source isolated, but when it came down to, all right, who's actually going to pull the trigger and who's going to go in for the killing blow, packs might often change their mind. They might realize, no, this is too dangerous of a situation. We've done all this work, but we're not willing to nobody here is willing to go forward and finally pull the trigger and see this thing through to the end. Also, breeding status was a big factor in determining the success rate of wolves in hunts. If a wolf pack had offspring, the breeding male and the breeding father, these parents basically would seem to lead the hunt more effectively than the offspring of younger generations or earlier generations. So breeding status was a big trigger in driving the kill rates and the success rates. Additionally, the more males that you had in the pack, typically the more success you had in bringing down large prey, because males are generally larger and they're capable of dealing that killing strike, whereas females typically are more cursorial and are very efficient in pursuing their prey in order to exhaust it. I'm kind of going to wrap up really quick here just by saying that in addition to all these variables with hunting success, wolves have an entire suite of predators on the landscape that they also have to compete with, as well as prey having to compete with other resources, which ultimately influence the dynamics of what predators pursue and when they pursue it. So in the Yellowstone ecosystem, we have grizzly bears, black bears, mountain lions, coyotes. All these predators are in competition with the wolf directly as well as indirectly. And also humans are a variable. Outside of the park, humans hunt elk and occasionally bison. And so this also adds another dynamic of competition that wolves have to struggle for. Bison obviously are not predators, but bison being more abundant than elk can influence the elk population and also the elk's movements on the landscape, again, directly and sometimes indirectly influencing how wolves are going to hunt. We have what we call interspecific competition, where as these predators are engaging with one another, they ultimately are all striving for the same resource. And in this photograph, we have a pack of wolves driving off a grizzly bear, because these two species are ultimately pursuing the same resource, and that competition makes tensions go high. Kleptoparasitism is when one animal obtains a food source and another animal moves in and steals that food source. And I think this is interesting, so I'll bring it up really quickly. I've brought it up before, but mountain lions are more successful at hunting than wolves are. And yet mountain lions are typically solitary hunters. And so when they make a kill, a group of wolves can come in and they will chase off a mountain lion. Bears do the same thing to mountain lions. They'll come in and steal a mountain lion's kill. And this causes the mountain lion to have to hunt more frequently. So the kill rates of mountain lions goes up because these other predatory species, wolves and bears, are bullies, and they steal the mountain lions' hard-earned dinners. So mountain lions have to work more hard. They have to work harder in order to offset their losses. Interestingly, when bears steal the kills of wolves, wolf kill rates decrease, which was an unexpected finding. Because again, it's so difficult for wolves to go out and have to wrestle something that is dangerous, potentially lethally dangerous to themselves, that it's more advantageous for them just to sit around and hope that they can get scraps from the dinner that they themselves brought down after the bears leave. So there, again, are some unexpected variables in terms of interspecific competition. And I'll just wrap up really briefly by talking about Yellowstone's history with elk. I've talked about this in a lot of other webinars, so I'll be brief, but hunting was banned in Yellowstone shortly after the park was created in 1872. The park then worked really hard to eradicate its predators. Wolves specifically were completely eradicated from Yellowstone because of the early park's policy, which was anti-predators. And in 1926, the last wolves were killed in Yellowstone. The elk population, without any predators, including no human hunting, began to grow to the point that we as park managers would remove elk annually to try and cull the population and manage the population at a more sustainable level. But that stopped in the late 1960s, and after that, with no intervention, the elk population skyrocketed. And in northern Yellowstone, you had an elk population of over 20,000 individuals in one herd. That's just one herd, not the whole population across the entire park. In the 1990s, wolves were reintroduced, a total of 31 wolves, 41 if you count some wolves that came in from Montana, were released into Yellowstone National Park. And what is often overlooked is that during this same decade, in the 1990s, grizzly bears quadrupled in their number on the landscape. They were a threatened species, but began to recover steadily in the 1990s and into the 2000s. Mountain lions, which had been exterminated from the park, began to recolonize all on their own. And human hunters changed their hunting regimes outside of the park to target female elk in order to decrease the overall elk population, because it was perceived that there were so many elk that it wasn't sustainable and it was damaging to the landscape. So all of these variables brought down the elk population until we have what is today a stable population in this same herd of about 6,000 elk. So I bring this up because I think it's important to recognize that wolves are remarkable predators. They're tenacious, and their endurance, I think, is truly what make them so incredible as a predatory species. But they're not a killing machine. They're not very effective when it comes to bringing down large prey, at least not when compared to other predatory species such as mountain lions. And yet, because they're capable of enduring, they have this really complex and beautiful connection with the prey that they are constantly in pursuit of. And as I began this presentation, I just wanted to emphasize that there are a lot of variables at play when it comes to determining what the hunting success of a predatory species is going to be. As in the case with wolves in Yellowstone National Park, we saw a decrease in the elk population, which helped to restore some of the riparian zones in northern Yellowstone. But it wasn't just the wolf that had a part to play in that. Likewise, the larger your pack size is, does not necessarily reflect the higher success rate when it comes to killing, because ultimately each individual in the pack is just that, an individual, and not all wolves are equally distributing that workload, the effort it takes to bring down an animal that is much larger than yourself. I'll conclude just by sharing this book written by my supervisors and my professor, which was published in 2015, Wolves on the Hunt. It's a pretty great resource into studying wolf predation on their various prey. And I will end right at the top of the hour. So thanks very much for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Aaron. You just bring so much depth to the subject. I really appreciate it. We do have a few questions and we can squeeze some in. Has anyone tried keeping bison, cattle, and sheep together to help prevent predation?
I don't know about bison, cattle, and sheep together, but there are some recommendations regarding keeping like donkeys and mules with your livestock. Donkeys and mules, as well as llamas, are pretty ornery, and they do a fairly good job of protecting other livestock in the same pasture. So I don't know about bison, cows, and sheep all together at the same time, but yes, there is some recommended predatory deterrence
Hmm.
by mixing other species in with your herds.
And do wolves prey on smaller things like rabbits and rodents?
Yes, they do, and I didn't have time to bring that up, but in Ellesmere Island, for example, you have musk oxen, and when the wolves aren't eating musk oxen, they're eating Arctic hares. The number one basement prey source for all life in Yellowstone National Park is the montane vole, which is something that very few people think about. But the montane vole it's like a little mouse, but essentially everything in Yellowstone that is a carnivore consumes those montane voles, including wolves. Um, there was a book written by Farley Mowat back in the 1980s, and it was turned into a movie by Disney called Never Cry Wolf. Both the book and the movie are great. I think they're really fun. But in that movie, it argues that wolves up in the Arctic consume and subsist off of mice alone for a large segment of the year, and that is an inaccuracy.
Mhm.
That is not biologically supported. But wolves do eat mice, they do eat rabbits, they do eat beavers and sandhill cranes, and I've a bunch of other stuff too.
Do they prey on coyotes?
They don't consume coyotes, but they do kill them. Wolves are very aggressive towards other canids, including dogs and coyotes and other wolves, but they're generally not cannibalistic.
Hmm. And when a pack leader is injured or gets old and unable to function as efficiently as it used to, does a younger male take over as the leader?
Well, it's complicated. Yes, sometimes, but not always. So older wolves seem to bring a lot to the pack dimension. So even if they're not hunting as effectively as they historically were when they were younger, they still can be the quote unquote top dog because of their seasoned experience. But in some cases, if they're not up to snuff, then yeah, they might be ousted by the pack, kind of dependent on the personality of the pack and the wolves.
Hmm. Getting back to what they eat, would they hunt salmon or trout?
Yes, they eat fish occasionally. So wolves are generalists. They have a huge variety of items on their menu that they can consume, including fish.
Hmm. Well, that is the last question we have time for today, so I'll turn it back to you for closing comments.
Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks so much for hosting this, Sunny, and thank you for those wonderful questions. I'm sorry that I didn't wrap this up sooner because I enjoyed those questions and I like that the Q&A segment of our webinars the best. Nevertheless, I hope you all enjoyed today's presentation and learned a little bit about wolf hunting patterns.
Absolutely. And thank you again, Aaron. And I just want to echo what you said. I think our audience gives or asks such thoughtful and intelligent questions. I always look forward to that part as well. Um, but that is all we have time for today. So I just want to thank you all for tuning in and I encourage you to tune in again next week for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.